As you can see, we've moved away from Greenwood Cemetery, and we're now here in front of Easterbrooks, and who are famous for their 12-inch foot-long hot dog. And we're going to go inside and speak with Ray Easterbrook. And Ray has, I'm sure, many, many stories that we are going to listen to.
Hi, I'm Ray Easterbrook, and this is my story. Well, when I was a child, I grew up in the house next door, and my mother and father actually owned this restaurant. My dad worked on the farm. We had a small farm out the back here, and my mother ran the restaurant mainly. It was her. Hi, as you can see now, we're at the side of the restaurant. A little description of how I grew up. The house here that you see was the house I was born in. My dad built that house. Behind it, he had 6 or 7 greenhouses that he worked in. At that time, our driveway went up roughly where that fence is, and then the road curved around back behind here where our picnic area is to behind the restaurant, and they made a left-hand turn that went down to my grandmother's house and made a little circle at the bottom, and there was 5 or 6 cottages there that she had, and down on the waterfront back that way is where she had the cottages dragged over from the bay. Roughly where the edge of that fence is, on the other side of the dirt road, was where we kept our horses. We had 2 horses there and a small barn. And I always thought, you know, what a lucky guy I was to have horses, until I found out my dad bought the horses because he knew that kids would want to come to the restaurant to see the horses. So it was more of a marketing idea than being nice to me, is what I eventually figured out. I never got any benefit of it other than shoveling the horse crap, obviously, but I did get to pet the horses and ride them. And the rest of the farm here was all growing tomatoes, lettuce, cucumbers mostly, all the way down to my grandmother's house. She, as a baby, actually, she put me in a bassinet underneath the counter here while she was working. And that was her way of babysitting me. And then as I grew older, in the back room, we had what we called the potato room. It was full of raw potatoes that we made French fries out of, and she would sit me on the top of all these bags of potatoes, and I would sit there all afternoon or whatever when I was very young and keep me out of trouble, so she knew where I was. As I got older, obviously everybody that's been in a family that owns restaurants, I ended up started working here. I think first job I can remember was cutting the potatoes. We had a hand thing, and then we'd put the potatoes in and push it down, and they'd drop into a bucket of water, and there was a whole process to making our own French fries. And then as time grew on, I started working behind the counter, and I did that almost until I started university. I went off to University of Toronto for 4 years. And then in my final year in the summer, I got accepted into law school. And I was all set to go to law school, and my dad approached me and said, you know, your mom wants to retire. Would you have any interest in taking over the business? And I didn't really think about that. It kind of came as a shock out of the blue, and I talked to my brother and my uncle, who were both lawyers, and they said being a lawyer isn't as much fun as it looks like, and they said I was always pretty good at business, and they thought I would be better off taking over the restaurant. So I mulled that over for about a month, and then I finally decided, when it came September, I had to decide whether to go back to school or not. I decided I would take over the restaurant and pay my mother a salary for the rest of her life, and that was sort of the deal I struck with them. And 42 years later, I was still here and sold it to my son in 2020. Oh, my grandmother Mabel was a real character. I remember all the stories about her, but she was such a loving grandmother. She lived about, we own the farm behind her, but she lived about 200 yards at the other end of the farm in a big house on the waterfront. And I would always go down there if I wanted a cookie or something. And then in behind her house were the trails that went down to the bay. I would play down there all afternoon or whatever, and I'd come back and she'd make sure I was all right and give me cookies or whatever. And she'd always pay me if I picked up sticks out of her garden. She had these huge gardens, and I think she paid me like 2 cents for about 3 hours of work picking the sticks out of her garden. But she was always very proud of her garden, and they were huge actually. She probably had a half-acre garden of all different types of flowers and everything. And then on the main part of the farm, my grandfather was bedridden for many years. For the entire time he was alive that I was a child, he was bedridden. He couldn't get out of bed. So she ran the farm pretty much by herself. And she'd do all the work. And I remember one time when she was very old, she broke her hip. And eventually the hip healed enough. I think she was in her 70s that she was out. I remember her out there with a cast on her leg and hoeing the garden with this cast on her leg from her broken hip. But she was the real driving force behind the family. Like I say, my grandfather was very ill, and he didn't get out of bed for, I hear, about 10 or 12 years. So she was sort of on her own running things, and she was the real entrepreneur in the family. They, being farmers during the Depression and everything, they didn't have any money really, so she had to make a living any way she could. So she got the bright idea of, you know, when they were tearing down houses over in Hamilton, she would buy them up before they would, or probably get them for free, knowing her, and drag them across the bay on the ice by horse, and then drop them on the waterfront that we owned down there. We had almost 1,000 feet of waterfront. And she'd drop these cottages down on the beach and rent them out until they fell apart, and then go get other ones. And she did everything she could to make a dime to hold it together. Like, they bought the farm in October of 1924, which was just before the Great Depression, and they had to carry a mortgage all the way through the Depression. So she started, I think, at around 1925 selling fruits and vegetables here,